Welcome back to Will I Ever Learn Chinese? I'm Jeanette Seiko. In this episode, I talk about how I found speakers to talk to and improve my spoken Chinese. Finding speakers should be easy, right? There are Chinese people everywhere, and you can just start speaking to them. Well, yes. And no, there are some pitfalls. For example, at this stage I was following a lot of social media learner groups, and some of these were specific to learning Chinese, and others were more generic language exchange groups. In many of these groups, I'd come across people looking for exchange partners. So, having one language, you speaking one language, they speaking another language, and you exchange languages as you go along and learn together. And this can work really well. If you're both serious, if you have a way of dividing the time up, say you're meeting for an hour and each of you have the ability to speak in their language for 30 minutes or so. However, this situation is quite tricky and it can very easily turn sour. Why? Well, expectations will often differ. Your conversation partner may just want to speak in your language, so the language they are learning, and not their own, or vice versa. The best situation is usually to have a friendship where you're able to then share a language. There could be a working relationship where both languages become common or similar. Sometimes I've found people complaining that they had a conversation partner before, but this conversation partner vanished. They were no longer interested. And as a learner, you have to be mindful that there is something in it for both parties. If you're exclusively wanting to talk to somebody because they are a native speaker of the language you're currently learning, what's in it for them? You can't expect someone to be there for you to teach you their language without any reward. That does not mean that these situations don't exist, of course, but they're very rare. Sometimes you'll come across a speaker, and that's typically a speaker of a minority language, or a language that does not typically have very high status, who is extremely keen to teach you their language. But I wouldn't expect anyone to just be there for you because you want to learn their language. So the best way, usually, if you can afford it, is to pay someone to speak with you and teach you. I'm going to talk about finding teachers and working with teachers in the next episode. For now, I'm going to look at how I started speaking Chinese more naturally in my everyday life. As I was pondering how best to approach getting into speaking Chinese, I mentally listed a number of different options that were available to me. So there were my Chinese acquaintances, the lady in the village who shared a common interest in nature, my daughter's friend's mom, Chinese colleagues at work, and so on. And as I discussed earlier, most of the time I actually chickened out of speaking Chinese with them. When I saw them, I made a mental note that, as my confidence was growing, that I would eventually speak to them. Well, maybe. I was in dire need of getting over that hurdle of speaking, and just speaking to my cat wasn't enough. I thought maybe there is a conversation class or similar, and as I was doing an online search, I came across a Chinese meetup group that was meeting in my town. And there were a number of events scheduled in the coming weeks. So I felt extremely excited. I was able to meet others with the same hobby as me and get a chance to speak Chinese. At the same time, though, there was a little nagging thought in my head about whether my Chinese would be good enough yet. Would I be able to speak? Would I maybe be demotivated by going and not being able to speak very well? The description of the events was very nice, saying that all abilities were welcome and you didn't have to speak Chinese well to join in. And the meeting would also involve practicing English for Chinese speakers, so being a bit of a language exchange, so I could always just do that. However, the first meeting coming about, I chickened out a few hours before the meeting started. It seemed that I had suddenly lost all confidence in my Chinese speaking abilities, and I developed a range of reasons not to go, such as a slight headache, tiredness in my legs, and generally feeling slightly uncomfortable. And surely, coming down with a cold, it would be irresponsible of me to join the meetup group and pass on my germs to others, right? Miraculously though, after I had decided not to go, my symptoms stopped immediately and I felt quite guilty for not going. Two weeks later, the next session was planned, and I said to myself that I was determined to go this time. I prepared a lot of useful vocabulary ahead of the meetup, things I would be able to talk about later. That was, of course, great, but later, when I needed the vocabulary, I'd forgotten pretty much all of it, so cramming doesn't always work. The meetup was taking place in an authentic Chinese restaurant, which was very lively. There were many tables, there were many Chinese people there, and I could hear Chinese spoken around me. I found the meetup group immediately. They were sitting along a long bench, and quite a few of them were already there when I arrived, just on time. I said ni hao and sat down, and then introduced myself as 我是 Jeanette, I'm Jeanette, using my actual name. The others introduced themselves, and quite a few of the Westerners there had found their own Chinese names. I put down a mental note in my head saying that I would have to research Chinese names so that next time I would be prepared and I would have my own proper Chinese name as well. I was sitting opposite a Chinese woman who seemed to be a fair bit younger than me, but I find it difficult to judge age, especially amongst Chinese people who often look very young. Anyway, we started talking for a bit, half in Chinese, half in English. The restaurant was packed, and it was quite noisy. So I sometimes struggled to hear what the other woman was saying, and I had to ask her to repeat things a few times. It turned out that she was a linguist as well. She was currently studying for her PhD at another university, about an hour away by train. Her topic was even slightly related to my area of research, so we ended up having a chat about linguistics. But at that stage, I felt there was some distance, there was a gap. And I often felt that later, sometimes with Chinese PhD students and sometimes with others. And I think it's due to the cultural differences, because being a student in China, lecturers and professors are in a very different hierarchical standing to students. And students, even those studying abroad in the UK, will sometimes find it difficult to relate to that and to be natural with those that are hierarchically higher up than them. It's quite different in the UK, and I find that when I work with students, I can easily engage with them on a personal level. But in this semi-private setting, there still was some sort of status difference that became apparent. Again, I found it quite difficult to reconcile my professor persona, as it was now seen by some others, with the speaks rather rubbish Chinese persona that I was portraying in that situation. It came to ordering. We had to order our food, and I had prepared to do so in Chinese. And again, this did not really fully go to plan. As I was ordering, I wanted to make sure that the restaurant staff knew that I was vegan, so that I didn't want to have any egg in the noodles I was ordering. And I said, 我是纯素食主义者. I'm a vegan. The owner looked at me funny and then shrugged. My conversation partner came to my rescue and said a few quick words to him in Chinese. I did not fully understand what she was saying, but the owner was now visibly relieved, and he gave me another strange look and left. Oh dear. Well, at least I had tried. I pulled all of my courage together and started talking to the lady opposite again, in Chinese. I asked her why she was at our meetup when she was studying in another city, and she said, 是因为我的家在这里. Wow, this was something I understood, even in the noisy surrounding. Because my family are here. 是因为 meant because, I knew that, 我的 meant my, 家 meant family, and 在这里 is here. Now we would have a common topic to talk about, family. Wow, but then I thought, well, she looks quite a lot younger than me, so maybe when she was talking about family, she was talking about her Chinese parents. I decided to inquire about her living situation and asked whether her parents were in Britain, and she said no. Okay, that settled it. She had children just like me. Talking about home and family was something I had learned and felt more comfortable about than talking about my job and its associated difficult vocabulary and status issues. So, being mothers, I could talk to her about children and the status wouldn't necessarily make such a big difference. So I proceeded to ask her about her children. She looked at me strangely and then said, pretty outraged, that she had no children. Now I was really confused. Hadn't she just told me that her family was here? It really did not make sense. I smiled politely, and she did as well, and we awkwardly started to talk with other people around us. For that part, that was mostly in English for me, because the people I was sitting next to were also only just starting to learn Chinese, and we ended up succumbing to the easier option at that stage. And also I was pretty confused. But I got a lot out of this English bit as well, because I was quite interested in the stories that the others were telling. One had been studying Chinese at university, had lived in China, and now wanted to keep up the language, so she was joining into these meetup groups. Another one was from Hong Kong and spoke some Mandarin as well. Others were only just starting to learn the language in various different ways, going to courses and the like. It was very invigorating to hear other learners' stories, their successes, their reasons to learn Chinese, their goals. Some people came there just to chat. Others were very serious about practicing their Chinese. Yet others were just dipping in, seeing if they could make new friends or maybe meet some other people locally. When I left after 2 hours or so, I felt quite happy. I had spoken some Chinese. I had come out of my comfort zone and I had tried, at least, to get out there. Not all of it was successful, but it was good enough for a start. And I had also talked to some lovely people, hearing about their reasons for learning Chinese. As I drove home, a realization suddenly struck me. Jia, the word that this PhD student sitting opposite me had been using, can mean both family and home. So the Chinese lady I'd been talking to had said to me, because my home is here and not because my family are here. Oh dear. No wonder she was confused about my question about her supposed children. As soon as I got home, I looked up the word in the dictionary and I found that when referring to family, the combination 家人 is typically used, meaning family people. When used on its own, 家 usually refers to home. Once I figured out what I had done, I saw the funny side of things, but I also felt slightly embarrassed. I had put my conversation partner in an awkward situation, inquiring loudly in a social situation about her children when clearly she did not have any. However, I tried to be kind to myself and concentrate on the funny side. These mistakes are incredibly common, and indeed I kept making mistakes like this. I got the wording slightly wrong, and so on, but I reminded myself that I was learning and I had to make these mistakes in order to succeed. Again, I was giving up my dignity a little bit and I was just continuing with my learning and not taking things to heart too much. This mistake, in any case, was a brilliant learning opportunity because I wasn't making this mistake again. I had now firmly learned how to use 家 and 家人 in situations like this. The next meetup came round and I chickened out again. Oh, I was quite disappointed in myself about this, but I had just had an extremely tiring day at work. I had been teaching for 4 hours, then supervising students and also meeting with colleagues. And by the time I got home that day, I was utterly exhausted. My ability to speak Chinese at that point was close to zero, I felt. It really made such a big difference how alert my brain was and how ready I was to speak. Once I had taken the plunge and dared to speak Chinese with real people as I had done at the meetup, I started to make Chinese friends in other situations. There was the mum of my teenage daughter. When I picked her up from a party, I had a quick chat with the mum. And after a few more encounters, I started to dare to speak to her in Chinese. Another chance opened up as well when I was attending a local festival representing my university, and one of the other colleagues turned out to be from China. I briefly chatted with him and told him about my obsession with the Chinese language, and he was pleasantly surprised, and we spoke a tiny little bit in Chinese together. I couldn't totally express myself, at least not the way I wanted, and we ended up switching to English occasionally, but that didn't really matter. We exchanged contact information at the end of the event, and eventually he became a good friend. I met him for lunch at work, and again we spoke a mixture of Chinese and English, and then we ended up having coffee together or occasionally cooking a meal or going to the supermarket together. This was great because it gave me the opportunity to speak Chinese or English in quite a relaxed situation with somebody I was friendly with. He was also quite accepting of my Chinese not being perfect yet. And I sometimes felt bad because I thought, this must be quite boring for him. But then we would switch to English and it didn't really matter. Still, I felt that when I was talking to friends, I couldn't really stop and start or ask them too many times, "What did you just say? Can you repeat this?" I just needed to develop my fluency and my speaking ability in another environment. And this is when I decided to find a conversation teacher. And I'm going to talk all about this in the next episode.